47, I think it's 47 of the Hannah on the Road podcast. I'm Hannah Nisa, your host for today and always. And as usual, I'm coming to you from my living room in Berlin, where it's a bit colder than the last few weeks, but I actually don't mind because it means I can wear more of the warm things and the knitwear. So yay! I hope you had a wonderful 2 and a bit weeks since we saw each other the last time. And first of all, let me start with saying thank you to everyone who left a comment and welcomed me back. I was so excited to hear that you're excited about having me back. And yeah, it just, I don't know, it warmed my heart to hear that you enjoy watching this podcast. And I hope you enjoy watching this episode too. I think it's going to be a bit on the shorter side, definitely not as long as the last one. And we'll start off with what I'm currently working on. So we'll start off with the lighter stuff. Then I want to share one thing that's currently in the shop with you. And then I want to answer a question that I got from or after the last episode. And I also want to talk a little bit about pattern pricing, because that's the topic that's been going around in quite heated discussions on Instagram in the knitting community these past 2 weeks, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that as well. So settle in, grab a cup of tea or coffee, and maybe you're knitting, and I hope you enjoy spending a little bit of time with me. Before we dive into what I'm currently working on, if you want to find me on the interwebs, the best way to do that is on Instagram, where I'm hlh.designs, and there's also a website and a web shop where you can buy my project bags and sustainable knitting tools, and that's hlh-designs.com. I think that's everything out of the way for now. So let's start with what I've been working on, because people, my knitting funk might be over. I'm a bit scared to put that out there because chances are that I'm jinxing it, but I almost finished one thing and I cast on another thing, and I actually knit quite a lot in the past couple of weeks. So yeah. So let me first show you what I almost finished. And it's this cute little baby sweater. That's a tiny bit big for a baby, but well, better too big than too small. And this is the work in progress that I shared with you last time. This is the Langoz Sweater by Julie. Now I have to cheat because I actually, I want to make sure that I pronounce her last name correct. So Julie Chadunet, and it's a seamless sweater with quite an interesting construction because, as you can see, if I don't hold this, it's gonna flop open. So you knit it from the top down, but you do a little bit of magic so that you create this kind of flap here that will be attached with buttons. So this is the only thing that I have left to do, pick out a few buttons and then sew them on. It's been blocked and all the ends are woven in. It's really just that last bit that's missing, and I'm waiting for my next visit to my local yarn shop because they always have really cute buttons and I want to pick up a few there. What else is there to say? So let's talk about the yarn first before we talk about modifications. I used Tulliver yarn BFL Masham DK for this in two different shades, in a gray and sort of like a grayish blue, and I really liked how it knit up. It bloomed beautifully during blocking, and it was a pleasure to knit with, so I can highly recommend Elke's yarns. Tulliver yarn is where it's at. I decided to make the gray the main color just because I had more of it, and then I introduced the blue in the little stripes. And just because I wanted to switch it up a little bit, I decided to do the bottom hem in the blue as well, and then have a little stripe action going on in the cuff of the sleeves, which is not what the pattern calls for, but I think it's kind of cute. There are a couple of things that I will say to this. One, I did not swatch, and although this is the size for 3 months, I think it came out bigger. I actually didn't measure it. I'm pretty sure I'm quite off gauge because, and like row and stitch gauge, because my measurements when I measured how long the body was going to be were significantly off compared to the instructions of how many stripes you were going to knit. So there's something off about my row gauge there. Not the fault of the pattern. I think the pattern is well written, suitable for everyone from a beginner to someone who just wants a little mindless baby or kids knit. The other thing that bothers me a little bit is because you work the yoke part, so the flap and also the back and forth before you join in the round for the body. You can actually see that I hadn't knit in quite a long while because my gauge is significantly different and less even in the yoke part than in the body part. So you can clearly see that like the knit purl instead of just knitting took its toll. I don't mind that much because it's a baby sweater. It's fine for a kid. If it were for me, I wouldn't mind because it's actually something that I noticed during knitting. I was kind of hoping it will block out. It did not. So yeah, there's that to say. We'll see how it fares in terms of wearability, but so far I'm pretty happy that we have another little FO for our little one. Yay! When I finished that, or a couple of days after I finished that, we took a little trip with my in-law family to Austria. We do that once a year where David's parents rent a house or an apartment somewhere, anywhere in Germany or one of the neighboring countries, and then we spent a couple of days there with his family, and we usually work from there. So that's what we did for the majority of the last week, which was really nice. We got to see snow again because it snowed for 3 days. Took a couple of beautiful hikes, and I also took a new knitting project. So there, if you've been following this podcast for a little while, basically from before the hiatus, you will know that I gifted my mom, my dad, and my sister vouchers for Christmas for hand knitting. So my dad wished for socks, my sister wished for a sweater, and my mom originally for a poncho, but then she changed that into a shawl. And it was so much fun sitting with them and trying to figure out what they were going for, and then looking at Ravelry and pulling up patterns, and then they made the decision what they wanted, and they also decided for the yarn and the colors. And yeah, I've been feeling quite guilty, honestly, because those projects were on the top of my knitting list after Christmas, and then I didn't want to knit anymore. So I actually cast on my dad's socks just before I got pregnant, and I just didn't feel, I still don't feel like knitting them. But for some reason, I felt after the little baby sweater was done, I would want to start on my mom's shawl, which is kind of curious because I'm not a shawl knitter. I don't know what it is about shawls, but something just, I don't know, they never really appealed to me. I like wearing them, I just don't like knitting them. Maybe that's one of the things that pregnancy is changing, because I'm having a lot of fun with this project, and I'm kind of contemplating casting on another shawl after this. I don't know what's happening to me. I haven't had any sort of food related things that I wanted to eat, like Nutella and pickles or something like that. So maybe all of the pregnancy related preference changes are related to knitting? Is that a thing? I don't know. Anyways, long story short, so I cast on the Baubles shawl by Andrea Mowry. It's my first ever Andrea Mowry pattern, and I'm going to insert a little picture of it here so that you can see how the finished object is going to look like. And this is how far I got. Ooh, sorry. It's kind of hard to show. How am I going to show it like this, maybe? So, yeah, this is how far I got so far, and I really enjoy this knit. It's a shawl that's gonna come out sort of triangular, a little bit asymmetrical, I think, and it's knit on the bias. It's knit in a way that I have never sort of like shaped a shawl before. I've done the classic central increase thing. I've also done a crescent shaped shawl. Have I done anything else? I don't think I've done anything else. And here you shape the shawl by with different rates of increases and decreases, basically, which I think is really fun. And as long as you pay a bit of attention to where you need to increase and decrease, it's all perfectly fine. The other thing that makes this enjoyable for me is because the shawl comes in different sections. So on the photo that I will have inserted, you might have seen that it's alternating between garter stripes, brioche, and lace section, and then ends with like a complicated brioche bauble border thingy. And I really like that because it keeps me engaged. It keeps things interesting. It's kind of this just the next row, you know, you just want to finish the next section. So that's something that I really enjoy. And I honestly also enjoy working with these yarns, although they're something that I usually wouldn't have picked up because two of them are superwash yarns. But my mom really loved the colors of the original sample, and although I tried, I couldn't find a dyer who was making a single ply natural yarn, so a non-superwash yarn in similar colors. So I decided to not push my luck, and instead I went to my local yarn shop at the end of last year or beginning of this year, and I looked at what they had in stock, and they, luckily for me, had a couple of colors that came really close to the original colors. So the gray one here is a Malabrigo, and it's Malabrigo Mechita, which is a fingering weight yarn. It's a single ply 100% superwash merino. I don't have the tag here, so I'm not entirely sure how that particular color is called. The golden one is a Manos del Uruguay merino silk blend, and this colorway is called Curry. And I really love how it's a little bit variegated, but not too much, and I really love how lively it makes the shawl. There's going to be a third color, which I've brought with me. It's this one. It's another skein of the Mechita by Malabrigo, and this is teal feather. So this is also, I think this is going to look so good, and it's going to look incredible on my mom. One more thing that I wanted to say here is that this is actually my very first ever brioche. I've never knit brioche before. I have no idea why, because it's really fun and it's not hard at all. Really, not like I thought it was this complicated, super complex thing that would break my brain. No, it's super simple, and I love the effect that it has, especially with the two colors. It's super fun, and that really, like, it's bite-sized. You just want to get to the end of the row and then slide your stitches back and then begin the next one. I really enjoyed this part, and I'm looking forward to the next one. What's coming up now is the lace section. So I think that will require a bit more concentration. This brioche part and also the garter stripes part was great for trade knitting and also for knitting when I was sitting with my in-laws. Yeah, but the next part will probably require a bit more concentration. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else that I have to say about this. I really enjoy the pattern. I enjoy the pattern writing. I haven't found any mistakes, and everything is super clear, which I always appreciate. I love the yarn. I love the yarn pattern combo, and I'm actually inspired to knit on this a little bit when we're done here. Yay! So, that's everything that I'm currently working on. I'm not super eager to cast on anything because I enjoy working on the shawl, and I don't think I need another work in progress right now. before we get into the question that I got after the last episode, I wanted to share with you that I just restocked the last of the yellow project bags. So as you might know, I changed the shop system for HLH Designs at the beginning of this year, away from shop updates towards signature colors. So there are 3 colors that are always available, and then a seasonal color. And yellow was the first seasonal color for this year, and we're almost sold out. So there's a handful of medium-sized ones, which is this one, this size. I think there's one small one and a couple of large ones left. And I really, really love this yellow, especially this time of the year. Reminds me of daffodils and being outside and seeing all the beautiful flowers crop up in the Austrian mountains. So makes me really happy, and I just thought I would let you know that when these bags are gone, the yellow ones, they're gone, so they won't be coming back. So if you're interested, they're in the shop now. Alrighty, let's talk about the question that I got asked after the last episode. So last episode, I announced on the podcast that I'm expecting our first baby. It's been out in the world, well, the announcement has been out in the world, in the Instagram world for a while, but as the last episode was the first one where I recorded after I became pregnant, I thought I would share that with you. And I already said, this is not going to become a baby podcast. Like, there's no way that I'm not going to talk about baby and about pregnancy, but I don't think I'm going to become like just interested in talking about the baby, and I don't think you're interested in just talking about the baby either. But there was one thing that I mentioned in the last episode where I asked you if you wanted to know more about that, and a couple of you said yes, you would like to know more about that. Someone commented, yeah, I'm probably, like, I'm bracing myself for another Hannah-Lisa rant. Yeah, probably yes. But if you've been watching this for a while, you are probably on board with me ranting about things every once in a while, aren't you? So I shared in the last episode that while we did find out the gender of the baby, well, we found out to be a bit more mindful with my language, we found out whether it's a boy or a girl, and we decided not to share that with anyone. We're both a little bit scared that maybe something is going to slip for one of us, but so far, knock on wood, it hasn't. So yeah. And I asked if you wanted to know why, and some of you said yes, you'd be interested in knowing why. It's a decision that, so we both weren't entirely sure whether we wanted to find out whether it's a boy or a girl. I always lean towards yes. David leaned towards no. And why we decided to find out in the end was honestly because we had a slight preference. And we were scared that if we didn't find out and I was in labor and then delivering this beautiful baby and it wasn't what we thought it would be, what we felt it would be, or what for whatever reason we kind of wish it would be, that we'd be disappointed and that we'd color the first hours and days of our baby's life outside the womb with that. I've heard from people who have children that fear, or that they think that fear is unsubstantiated, which I don't know about because it's my first child. I don't know whether that's the case or not. But I know myself well enough to know that it would be easier for me to deal with, I wouldn't say disappointment, but just to deal with whatever feelings would come up when we found out whether it's a boy or a girl now than while I was in labor and delivering this baby. Because I wasn't entirely sure how I was gonna react with, like, when we found out whether it was a boy or a girl. And I just knew for myself that I thought it would be easier dealing with whatever came up at that point in time. And I'm glad that we chose that way. I would be perfectly fine not knowing for baby number 2. Because now I know. It's so funny because before we found out, I also would have said, honestly, like, the thing that matters most is that they are healthy. But now I feel that, like, I fully feel that. I don't care whether they come out as a boy or a girl and whatever life path they choose. So I'm happy not finding out for baby number 2, but I'm happy having gone through the thought process of finding out and reacting to whatever I was feeling at that time. Long story short, so that's why we decided to find out, but we decided not to tell anyone because we both believe that gender prejudice and gender identification and everything that is, to put it very bluntly, that is bad and wrong in our society with putting certain expectations on people who identify a certain way, that starts super, super, super early on. And it's something that we want to actively work against. For example, we chose a gender neutral name. While we know how we think about it, we also know that we have a lot of work to do within ourselves, which is shown in the fact that we did think we would have a slight preference, right? Like, once we started working through why we had that preference, it quickly became clear that it was because we ourselves had so many expectations about how life would be with a baby that was a boy or a girl. And that in itself showed us that we have such a long way to go. We think that by not sharing it, it's a good opportunity for us to continue doing this work, but it's also a good opportunity for us to share with the people that we love and that we care about, that it's important for us that they challenge their own gender assumptions and their own gender identification assumptions and what that means for a child. So that's why we chose not to share the gender with anyone. I'm not entirely sure how this will end up, but what I already know now is that I have to actively fight against any gender prejudice because I know what they are, and I don't. It's funny if, like, even trying to be very conscious about this, trying to be very aware, I find myself, whenever I'm looking at kids' clothes or at yarn for whatever we're making for the baby, gravitating towards something which shows me that I also have a lot of work left to do. That's why we chose to do it that way. I'd be curious to hear, if you have kids, how you handled that and how your experience was, and if you don't have kids, what your thoughts are on that as well. So let me quickly check the timer just to make sure that we're not running out of time. All right, we have about like 4 minutes until the camera stops recording. So I think I'm gonna just stop it now and restart it in a second. Alrighty, I'm back. Whoa, that was already like 25 minutes. So apparently it's not such a super short episode. The last topic that I wanted to talk about today is a little bit about pattern pricing. So if you've been on Instagram in the last, I would say, 2 weeks, you will probably have seen the discussions around pattern pricing from knitwear designers and financial accessibility of knitwear patterns. I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of complicated thoughts. I have a lot of complicated feelings around this. And I'm not entirely sure if I'm ready yet to share all of those, because I feel that there are things that I still need to work out and work through. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to share. Starting with what I did and what I am going to do. I put up my pattern prices at the beginning of this week, because at the price level that I had before, they weren't sustainable anymore. And if I say sustainable or fair pattern pricing, what I mean with that is that with an assumption of a certain average number of pattern copies that you're selling, that you're able to make minimum wage per hour of work that you put in and recoup your cost for a knitting pattern. It's a simple calculation. You track how long you need for a certain pattern, including sample knitting and everything. You add on any expenses that you had, for example, tech editing or test knitter compensation, things like that. And then you divide that by an average number of pattern copies that you think you'll be selling to come up with a price that I think is fair. This average number of pattern copies that I've always been using comes from a survey that I did about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, when I started publishing my first knitwear patterns. I had written a long blog post about pattern pricing back then, and I'm about to write another one with an update about that, because the pattern price that I ended up ultimately with that calculation was around 20 euros for a sock pattern. And that's a lot of money, and I didn't feel comfortable charging that at that point. So I charged 6 euros for a sock pattern, which was far from sustainable in the sense that I explained before how I defined it. I decided to put up my pattern prices at the beginning of this week because I felt that we have long been talking about how the current pattern pricing structure is neither fair nor sustainable, and yet no one was doing anything about it. No one was actually raising their prices, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. There are people who are making enough money because they're selling thousands of patterns at a price of 3, 4, 5 euros per pattern copy, which generates more money than you probably need to live off in a given month. That's a fraction of designers. That's less than 1% of everyone who sells patterns on Ravelry, as far as I understand. I also think it's scary to put up prices, because there's always, every time that someone did that and talked about it publicly, there's always been backlash about it. There's also the intricate and complicated relationship between pattern pricing and financial accessibility of patterns. And I think there are a lot more reasons why people didn't put it up. But at the end of the day, for me, if we're not raising our prices as designers, no one else is going to do it for us. With the new pricing structure that I have, I'm still nowhere near my 20 euros that I would need to charge. And that's the way that it is right now. I'm not entirely sure how I'm gonna think about pattern pricing in half a year from now. Or in a, sorry, that was the timer that went off. Or in a year from now, so we'll see about that then. So long story short, I decided to raise my prices. What I've done in the past few days after that is I've done a lot of thinking around this, as I said, complicated relationship between fair and sustainable pattern pricing and financial accessibilities. I understand the wish of especially a lot of low-income knitters still having access to patterns and not be excluded because of higher pattern prices. I also understand the wish of designers to be fairly compensated for their work. What I will do is I will start introducing pay what you can, or as Frenchie from Uruguay put it, a pay what works model, which until this feature is available natively on Ravelry will probably look like a box on the Revelry page with a couple of different price points that you can choose from when you purchase the pattern. Everything goes according to plan. I'll be able to set that up today or at the beginning of next week. I don't have a lot of patterns, so I don't think it will take a lot of time for me to set this up. But that way everyone can choose to pay what they can and what they feel is appropriate. I will say to that model that this will only alleviate the unfairness and unsustainability of knitwear design pricing and knitwear design compensation if it still leads to an increase in the average pattern price, right? So if everyone chooses the lowest tier, then of course this is not going to change anything for designers. So what that model implies is that everyone who can afford to pay more actually does that. We'll see how that goes. I have faith in our community that there are a lot of people out there who understand that model and who understand those implications. I also think that there are a lot of people who can't afford high pattern prices who will hopefully take advantage of the pay what works model and pay what they can. I also know that there are a lot of knitters out there who are spending a lot of money on yarn and who I hope will understand that if you're spending $150 on yarn for a sweater, that maybe a pattern price of 50 euros for the pattern for a set sweater is not too much to ask for. So those are my current thoughts, and that's what I did. That's what I'm going to do. As I said, I have a lot of complicated thoughts and feelings on this, and also on the way that this discussion has been going on Instagram. I think money is a topic that evokes a lot of feelings, both on the designer side and on the knitter side, and I think that's been reflected in the way that this discussion has been going on Instagram. I'm at a point where I'd much prefer to have conversations and discussions, and also difficult conversations like that, in person or on a Skype call, than having the feeling that we're shouting at each other on the internet. I think that it feels as if there are two camps right now, and if there's not a lot of bridge building between those camps, which makes me kind of sad. And I feel that I get tired of this sometimes. I want to change something in this community, but I also want this to be the effect of having conversations with people who think differently than me. But I want to have conversations and not shout at each other over stories and Instagram comments. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Like, it doesn't mean I can't afford to not be on Instagram anymore. You know that as well as I do. And I understand that people are angry. But I think for me it means trying to look at what I'm doing, what I value, how I implement that in my business. And yeah, talking with friends about it, having conversations about it, things like that. And then putting things into motion. Anyways, rambling long stream of consciousness about pattern pricing. Yeah, if you have an opinion that you would like to share about this, feel free to leave a comment down below. But this was mainly to share that I'm thinking about this, to share with you what I'm gonna do. If you want to have conversation about this, okay, happy to do that. If you don't, that's also perfectly fine. So yeah, I think that is everything for today. I will close with saying that I debated with myself last week whether I wanted to stick to a super strict 2-week schedule like I had before, but that would have meant I would have had like this to show you and nothing really much more. So what I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to record every 2 to 3 weeks at a point where I feel like I have something to share, be it knitwear or discussions or recommendations or anything that I think you might be interested in. If there's something particular that you're missing from this podcast or that you would like me to talk about more, please do leave a comment below, and I would also love to just hear how you are and whether you're feeling well and how everything is in your corner of the world. I will see you again here in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and until then, take good care of yourself. Bye bye!